Hey guys, and welcome to my balance patch review. This is the balance patch before the Faeria model turns to the buy-to-play model. We're moving from free-to-play over to buy-to-play. And one of the goals of this balance patch was to bring up the power level of the core set, so you don't have to rely, it's not all players have to rely on buying DLC in order to get new cards and be able to compete at a reasonable level. Now, saying that, this balance patch has a lot of cards changed. Some of them are fantastic. Some of them were necessary, I would say. But overall, I'm very happy with what we've seen so far. It's just going to allow a lot of the cards to come into the metagame. Basically, some of the nerfs alone are going to help us see more cards that we didn't see play in Faeria for a very long time. So without further ado, let's just get into the cards. There's a lot to go through. I'll go through each card, what I think of the change, and how I think it might impact the metagame. Alright guys, let's kick this off. We have a long list of cards to go through, so let's start off with Imperial Drain. So this used to be a 0 Faeria cost structure that basically turned off all the wells, it emptied them. It deals 1 damage to itself, and then once the Imperial Drain had died, on the following turn, the Faeria wells would replenish. So what's changed about this card now? It does have a Faeria cost. It does cost 1 Faeria to plant the Imperial Drain, but also it has a last words ability, refill the well. So if you're able to clear the Imperial Drain somehow, you replenish the wells and start harvesting. This is a really good change because Imperial Drain was becoming quite an oppressive card for control decks, especially to deal with in the aggro matchup. Imperial Drain slams down, you're just like, well, I can't gain any Faeria anymore, and these red combat decks were just getting Faeria off the orb, using those combat creatures, and it was very unfair for control decks to manage. So this is a big nerf to Imperial Drain. It's a much needed nerf, in my opinion, and I'm very happy with how that card has turned out. So our next card is the Longhorned Yak. So the only thing that has changed so far with this is its life gain, from what I can check. I'm just going to double check here. Yeah, so it's had a life gain. So Longhorned Yak was once a 2-2, now it's a 2-3. Just making it a bit more viable, a bit more durable when on board. It doesn't die to Soul Drain anymore, it doesn't die to Cypher's Wrath. You're going to need a Flame Burst, so you're going to need a creature to take it out. So the durability on this card is just going to help it stick to the board and, you know, maybe get better value out of it. And we saw cards like Imperial Engineer getting more play once that gained that additional life. So just pushing it out of reach of some of the popular 2 Faeria removal cards. Monkey Genius is the next one, which is interesting because it had a wild land requirement, no longer has that, it's been removed. On your opponent's next turn, this gains +2/+2 whenever an enemy creature harvests Faeria. So this wasn't seen any play when it had the wild land cost. So I think the devs are thinking, you know what, we'll remove the wild land cost and see if it gets its way into any decks. If any decks want to utilize it, set it up nice and early, so if your opponent is collecting Faeria before you, you can drop the Monkey Genius down and you'll get this nice beefy monkey that help you fight on board. Next up is Queen's Favorite. Again, just a minor change in increasing its life. So it was once a 2-2, very vulnerable to popular removal like Soul Drain and Cypher's Wrath, but now it's a 2-3 with that protection ability as well. The protection might have gotten a little bit better, just based on one of the nerfs, but we'll talk about that when we get to it. So once again, just a life increase on this creature to make sure it can stick around and it might see more play. Now the Explorers, on the other hand, these have all changed. Now let me just get the information here. All 6 Explorers effects are no longer gifts. They will now gain stats whenever you meet the land requirements, and not just when you first play them. So beforehand, you'd play an Explorer card. It'd be Rainforest Explorer or whichever, Savannah Explorer, doesn't matter which one. Any Explorer card had a gift ability, and these effects here would then trigger on the gift. So you play the card down, the gift would happen, you'd resolve it, and the card would check if you had the necessary lands in order to gain the power up. Now the problem with that was you couldn't really play them in the early game because you needed usually a minimum of 4 lands before you get the full value out of the card. Now, Rainforest Explorer was actually one of the better explorers when they were a gift abilities, but now you will gain these power-ups as you acquire the lands, which makes them really solid early game collectors in dual color decks or even tricolor decks. You can slam these down as free frees, and they're going to be vulnerable to Flame Burst and Wind Soldier and stuff like that. But let me just get the other ones up. Let's see, just so you have another example. Okay, so yeah. So this one's actually a free. Some of the mythic ones are a little bugged at the moment. But yeah, this is a free as well. So these will gain the abilities as you develop those lands. So these could actually find their way into decks that need an early harvester, but also benefits from the land generation. I really like this change. I think it's very strong. I'm looking forward to see how the explorers find their way into decks, but especially land ramp decks, because you'll gain those benefits as you develop those lands. But yeah, our next one is a nerf. It's to the Yakapult. Now, Yakapult was once a free Faeria creature, but now a 4 Faeria creature, so still has the high land cost, but a little more expensive. And, you know, changing from 3 to 4 Faeria is actually a big deal, because the difference between 3 Faeria and 4 Faeria is, can I play this card for 3 Faeria when I have no Faeria at the start of my turn, so produce 3 Faeria, can I play this card and then draw a card or gain +1? Whereas 4 Faeria, you top deck Faeria, so you start off with 3 at the start of your turn because you've run out of Faeria. If you want to play the Yakapult down, you're going to have to +1 now. So that is actually a really big change. The difference between 3 Faeria and 4 Faeria in an instance where you are starved of Faeria is actually very important. So Yakapult's power level has been brought down. It's not just I can just slam Yakapult down now and then I can draw a card, or I can make a land, or I can gain +1. Now you're going to have to think about it when playing Yakapult in those situations. Now, Walking Fortress, interesting, because it's just had an attack increase. So it went from a 6/10 to a 7/10, which means Walking Fortress can now kill Colossus and Verdant Force. Will it be super impactful? I don't know. It's still a 7/10. So it's still got a lot of life. It may be able to 2-for-1 against those popular creatures, but we'll have to see. I'm not entirely sure where Walking Fortress fits, but a buff is never shied away from on cards like this. This might be better in, say, in the Pandora format, where you can kill those Verdant Forces or those high life creatures. But yeah, Walking Fortress just getting a little buff there. Maybe we'll see him in play if Colossus become very popular again. We're already seeing the Windstorm Colossus in a lot of decks. Wave Crash will probably make a comeback, but I'll talk about that in a couple of cards' time. But yeah, Walking Fortress, just a small buff there, but I think it's a pretty good one. So Weeping Idol. Now let me just quickly check. So Weeping Idol did cost 1 Faeria, so that's now 0 Faeria. So the Imperial Drain and the Weeping Idol have swapped their costs, and the forest requirement has been increased. So it was once a 1 forest, 1 Faeria structure. Now it's a 2 forest, 0 Faeria structure. So just making it a bit easier to play. Could now see play in the Avengers deck, because it doesn't cost any Faeria, and it will refund Faeria as we use those Altar of Souls. It may see more play in the future as we get more cards introduced into the game and more synergies are built around this self-harm, the self-damaging kind of mini archetype that's built within the game. So another creature that has been buffed. So reduced its cost. It once cost 3 Faeria, but now it costs 2 Faeria. Give a creature taunt. So a bit like the... Let me get it up. So it's a bit like this card here. Shamanic Dance. But you get a creature instead. So Shamanic Dance gives you +4 life and taunt, but you don't gain that creature that can harvest Faeria, whereas our friend here, the Tiki Chieftain, he is going to be able to harvest Faeria for you and give that taunt. I'm not entirely sure how relevant it is. It's still a 2/2, Maybe if it was a 2/3, I might be a bit more enticed in playing this card. But again, just a little buff. We'll see if it makes a difference. Next up, we have the Tiki Healer. So I believe Tiki Healer was a 5 cost. Yes, it was a 5 cost, and you gain 6 life. Now it's a 4 cost, so it's much easier to play in those desperate situations where you don't have a lot of Faeria. So you have free Faeria, like, I need a heal, +1, drop the Tiki Healer down, gain that 5 life, and you have a 2/5 to go along with that. Small buff, but I like it. It's a good get out of jail free card if you need a bit of life gain and a harvester in those dire moments. Tarim. Now Tarim just had a small change. He had his forest requirement reduced. I'm not entirely sure how much impact that will have. I think if you're running Tarim, you're probably running Wood Elemental and Thorian Golem anyway. So going up to 5 forests is not that much of a big deal. I've been playing Tarim in recent videos. I would have preferred a Faeria cost reduction personally. Maybe down to 12 Faeria, maybe lining up with Krog. But again, it's still a buff. It's still a buff. I don't know how relevant it'll be, but I guess only time will tell. Alright, so this is actually my favorite buff of the entire changes, and you guys will know why. Triton Trainer is back. It gives the next jump creature +1/+1. It used to be +2/+0. Didn't see any play. Now we can give our little jumpers +1/+1. So Blue Jump might be back. I've been playing Blue Jump on ladder today, and it's been doing alright. It needs refining. I need to figure out the build. It's not the Dream Reaver version. This is actually the old, kind of more tempo-orientated version. But Triton Trainer, this is now viable, I think. Giving a +1/+1 to Triton Warrior, making it a 5/5, or making one of your battle toads a 3/3, even making Water Elemental a 4/4. Very, very strong. So I'm looking forward to seeing Triton Trainer return to our good old Blue Jump decks. Now this is one of the big ones. I'm going to actually just talk about some of the developer commentary. You can actually find the developer commentary on some of the bigger changes like this on the patch notes on the website, so be sure to check that out if you want something a bit more in depth. So Frogify, from the developer's perspective and from my perspective as well, did kind of shut down a lot of cards. Basically, if you invested in something big, let's say Magnus for example, so 10 Faeria into your big boy Magnus, Frogify comes down, you lose 6 Faeria, and your opponent's probably going to be able to kill it. Wasn't very good for these kind of big invested creatures. So they've increased the land count up to 4 lakes, so not every deck's going to be able to use Frogify. I've been playing a lot of blue-green ramp recently, which runs Feed the Forest and Frogify. So I was able to go up to 8 lands, get the Leaping Fugus down, and I could use Frogify, I could Feed the Forest as well, so it's kind of splitting those power cards away from each other, especially in something as powerful as blue-green ramp. So Frogify, we might see more in mono blue now. It's a mono blue tool rather than a more universal tool. It very much depends on what players want to do when it comes to their land investment. So yeah, Frogify, very, very big change. This is one of the bigger changes of the balance patch. We'll have to see how it impacts the game. Gabriel Noble Gulliver. I'm a big fan of Gabriel Noble. I don't know if you guys have ever seen my fish decks, but I've actually built fish. I built fish around decks. I built decks around fish using Ruby Fish, using the Gabriel Noble to power up the Illusion of Grandeur. And I had a whole mono blue deck based around that theme, and it was a lot of fun. But seeing Gabriel Noble go up to a 4/5 is really cool because now Gabriel Noble can challenge cards like Triton Warrior, Mace Man, Gabriel Archon before it turns, even Gabriel Commander. So there's a lot of cards now that Gabriel Noble can match up against, and you still get that little ruby fish to collect Faeria or buff your Illusion of Grandeur if you're playing that kind of jank. So on to the red cards next. We have the Devouring Plant. So this card did gain a buff, I believe. Let me just quickly check. Reduced mountain requirement from 2 to 1. So very easy to splash the Devouring Plant as an anti-rush option in any decks that use mountain. So we might see this in the more like tricolor based decks as a defensive option. There's actually been a deck going around on the hub where you use Imperial Engineer and Devouring Plants to like nuke the board, which is quite funny. So that's going to be a buff to that deck at least, if you're playing that deck on the ladder. So yeah, Devouring Plant, a little buff there. I quite like it. Architect. Okay, cool. Architect is a card that I've been playing with recently, if you've been watching Will It Work, trying to find a way to build like structure decks with Doomgate, which is another card that got buffed as well. So Architect being changed to Wildlands, that's really helpful for the structure themed decks that use multiple colors. So that's a really good buff for the Doomgate deck. Maybe I'll revisit it, we'll have to see. Now Firebringer's buff is awesome, and mainly because it's more thematic than it was before. So Firebringer used to be a 1/1, but now it's a 2/0, which is kind of strange because it will die unless you have that power up from playing the angry cards, as we call them, the higher attack, low life creatures. But what I like about Firebringer now, Firebringer also buffs other Firebringers, and it also reduces the cost of Hate Seed. So the angry synergy is much more prominent in the Firebringer now, and it's just such a good flavor change for the card. I'm not sure if we'll see more play from Firebringer. I'm not sure if the angry archetype will return. The combat archetype is still very, very powerful, but like I said, very good change. Herald of War, a buff to combat once again, increased cost attack and life from 3 to 4. So it now costs 4 Faeria instead of 3 Faeria, now it's a 4/4. So much more durable, can challenge cards like the Triton Warriors, the Mace Men, all those type of cards. And the next combat creature you summon will gain +1/+1. So you can turn those Brigands into 3/4s. You can turn the Brutes into 4/7s, which is very durable for a creature that deals damage every time it hits. And again with the Grimguard as well, another popular card we see these days. So Herald of War, very, very good buff, I think, overall. And this combat trigger actually procs multiple times. So the Herald hits, say, a creature twice, and then you play another combat creature, it'll go up to a +2/+2. So they do stack on top of each other. So Herald's getting a nice buff there. Let's see if combat decks, especially red combat now, will start using this card. Now, Shedding Pest, this is a card we haven't seen a lot of in recent times. Used to be a staple of the mono-red decks, especially the angry archetype, which we were talking about with the Firebringer. So Herald's has quite a few changes. The mountain requirement has increased from 1 to 3, so much heavier on the mountains. Probably we'll see this in more mono-red. Life reduced from 3 to 2, so now it's a 4/2, not as durable as it once was as a baseline creature. And now the buff is increased from +2 to +2, so this goes up to a 6/4. Relevant stat line, 6 attack, being able to clear Grandshakers, Heralds, Grove Guardians, lots of good stuff you can kill now with the Pest. And again, building towards that angry synergy where it looks like the devs are trying to give angry a little bit of a push. Not so much in Red Rush, because Shedding Pest has had its mountain adjustment, just being conscious of Red Rush, I think, there. But we might see more mid-range decks come up, using HCs, using Firebringers, using the Pests. And yeah, maybe Angry will make its return. Alright, big change. Big change. If any of you watched my stream recently, I did actually talk about this card quite extensively. Now, I will say, it's not exactly the change I'd like to see, but it is definitely a step in the right direction. Grandshaker is a game warping card. It basically, you have to play around the fact that anything with 1 life is not going to survive against red. If they have enough Faeria to play Grandshaker, that card is going to die. Grandshaker has featured in so many decks throughout its time. Crackthorn decks, the Gemshell Tortoise decks, Mono Red. It's been in loads of decks. It's seen less play in some builds, but overall this card is very, very powerful. I'd even go as far as to say that this card is even stronger than Cypher. And Cypher's a legendary. So that says a lot. But Grandshaker has been changed. It is now 3 mountains. So it can't be splashed in just any old deck now. Now thinking about it, it's a little slower, which is good. Which means the cards like with 1 life will stick around longer. And I even saw a Fortune Hunter being played today. So players are already enjoying the fact that Grandshaker isn't going to come down so early, and we're going to see cards with 1 life being played more. like the Fortune Hunter. I think that's a cool card, and Grandshaykh was one of the cards that was locking this out, and the devs were very aware of this. The devs do state in the patch notes that Grandshaykh and Frog of Fire, two of these cards that do warp the game, and they are making adjustments to them and keeping an eye on them in the future. But Grandshaykh are much slower now, much harder to build towards. Let's see what happens. I'm very curious to see how the game shapes around this Grandshaykh change and the Frog of Fire change. Alright, we're on to the yellow cards next. Oath to Oblivion. Now this is a massive change, and I'm not entirely sure how it will affect things, because so for me, Oath to Oblivion was a card that fits in like a sacrifice deck, maybe green-yellow sacrifice, but it costs Faeria, which was a problem. And Green Yellow Sacrifice is a deck which will have cards you'll be willing to trade off for a 6/3 with charge free. Now it's at 5 deserts, so I feel there might be a little bit of push towards like a mono yellow sacrifice. So this card would feature very nicely in a deck with something like Shaitan Monstrosity. You could still use cards like the Deathwish Ghoul, you could use cards even like Village Elder, sack them for 0 Faeria, which is really good because you'll gain a benefit from it, and then you get that big 6/3 creature that can zip around the board with that mobility. But the 5 desert cost is quite hefty, so even though it costs 0 Faeria and you're going to be able to get this very powerful creature, it does come at the cost of time. It's going to take time to build towards this Oath to Oblivion and get that 6/3 down. But this change is very cool. I'm very curious to see what players cook up with this strategy. And yeah, I'm excited to see if we have any mono yellow sacrifices kind of builds come up in the future. Alright, Doomgate got buffed. That's really cool because, again, I was talking about the structures deck, and Architect got buffed, and it's much easier to play now. Doomgate is just cheaper. Cost reduction, cost 3 Faeria before, now it costs 1. So much easier to get Doomgate down and get it started, get the ball rolling, start sacking those creatures and building that life on the Doomgate. So it's a good change. It just means that Doomgate can come down without too much expense of resources, meaning you may be able to actually play an Architect in the same turn. I've just realized that from looking at them. Architect, 2 Faeria. Doomgate, 1 Faeria. You can actually combo these two very easily together in one turn, straight away accelerating Doomgate's life. Oh wow, that's really cool. So yeah, we've got a very fantastic change towards a structure build, which I have tried in Will It Work in one of the previous episodes. Structure's definitely got a buff, guys. Malevolent Spirit, the last of the yellow changes. 4 Faeria now instead of 5 Faeria. The desert requirement has been increased, so it is much slower. You won't be seeing this splashed into burn decks like Mono Red with a splash of Malevolent Spirit, because if it was just at 1 desert, you'd be able to play Mono Red Burn with just these guys in, and then when they show up, make a desert, play it down. So they did keep that in mind with the change, so it's much cheaper, you gain some life, deal a bit of damage, and of course you get that free body. Alright, over to the multicolored cards. Dreamkeeper got a buff. It had a life increase at the cost of nothing, actually. It's just now a 2/4. So a 4 Faeria 2/4 taunt, which has its ability of reducing the cost of all cards in hand by 1 and shuffling them back into your deck and redrawing the amount that you shuffled away. As a taunt creature now, it's far more durable, in line with Wood Elemental as a 2/4. So just a good buff overall, just making sure it can stick around, collect Faeria, or even just lock down a few threats before it gets taken out. So no more Flame Burst on Dreamkeeper. You're going to need that Bomb Slinger, or maybe even that Frog Tosser to kill it off. Skyward Swordfish. Now this card's interesting because I always felt like it was pretty good. You know, it's got good stats, it's a 4/7, it's durable, it's got mobility, it's got taunt. But the land requirements did hold it back. At 5 special lands, by the time you play this card, the game's going to be so far gone that it might not have any impact. But 4 lands, it may see more play. I'm not entirely sure where you'd put it. At the moment, green-yellow is definitely geared towards sacrifice, but maybe there are some archetypes hidden away where we can see maybe a more tempo mid-range orientated deck that uses green-yellow cards, and maybe that's where Skyward Swordfish fits in those style of decks. But it's going to take some testing before we see how impactful this change is. Alright, another one of the big nerfs with more developer commentary on this card. So, Soul Eater is very powerful. Probably one of the most powerful dual color creatures in the game. It can get to massive stat lines. And one of the big problems with Soul Eater, because the nature of the archetype, the green-yellow sacrifice, you often had a lot of little creatures kind of floating around, ready to trade or just run themselves into enemies to further empower the Soul Eater while it was on board. So Soul Eater was a big problem to deal with even after it was played, and the developers have identified this, and they know that green-yellow sacrifice is going to get more tools in the future, and they want to keep their win condition in check. So now the Soul Eater only gains power-ups while in your deck or hand. It does not gain any power-ups while on the field, which is great because it means it's much easier to kill. This card is already difficult to kill. It didn't need to gain power-ups while it was on the field, so a nice little change there. Making sure that the win condition for that archetype is kept in check. Alright, we're getting to the end now with the Ice Rock Behemoth has been buffed. It was once an 8 Faeria 8/8, and now a 7 Faeria 7/7. And now the Frogify change is implemented. This card can stick around. You know, Last Nightmare is still a clean answer to it, but it's only at the cost of 1 Faeria for the user of Ice Rock Behemoth, so not so bad. But Frogify was just like a massive swing in the favor of the player who uses it on Ice Rock Behemoth beforehand. So Ice Rock Behemoth now in a really good spot to feature in these kind of blue-red control decks, and mainly because of the changes to Gemshell Tortoise. So this is the last nerfed card. Gemshell Tortoise, incredibly powerful. Some of the stuff you could do with Gemshell Tortoise was crazy, but now they've kind of toned it down, keeping it in check, maybe to go with some of the cards that are released in the future. But also Ice Rock Behemoth just got buffed, so we could see some 5-cost Ice Rock Behemoths come out in the future, but reduces the cost of cards drawn by 2 instead of 3. So no more 0-cost Flame Bursts coming out of the Gemshell Tortoise, or 0-cost Ninja Toads. There's a lot of cards that really benefited from the 3-cost reduction. Grandshaker, 3 Faeria Grandshakers, absolutely crazy. But yeah, so the copy and the card you draw is no longer reduced as much, just down to 2. And the attack has gone down to 5, so it's more in line with cards like Grandshaker, Ancient Herald, the Grove Guard. It can't kill those cards anymore on its own. It's going to need a little bit of help. And that's what was one of the other powers of Gemshell Tortoise, just cleaning up those very powerful mid-range creatures because of that extra attack. So very good change overall. But that does wrap up all the changes so far. Lots of changes to digest, lots of things to test out over the next couple of weeks. But yeah, looking good. So that wraps up my initial thoughts on this massive balance patch that dropped on June 27th. Lots of different things to consider. I'm very excited to try some decks out myself. I'm going to go to Blue Jump straight away. Triton Trainer, I've already been playing it. You can't stop me, guys. I love Blue Jump. And Triton Trainer buff is fantastic, and I can still use Frogify as well because I'm going to be playing mono blue, so Blue Jump could come back. I'm very excited to look at structures again. We can play Doomgate and Architect together. Grandshaykh won't be around as much to punish structures, and yeah, the nerfs are actually some of the bigger changes that I'm excited for. The meta warping cards like Frogify and Grandshaker have been checked, so I'm curious to see what happens in the future and how players build the decks in both, more casual Faeria but also competitive Faeria as well. So going forward, I will be trying out decks on Will It Work and Become a God, designed by you and designed by myself. But if you would like for me to try a deck out, be sure to leave a comment below with a link to a deck on the hub. I'm happy to try a lot of different decks, but you guys need to build serious decks for me. I'm not saying they can't be fun, but they need to have a win condition. They need to have some logic behind the design. If you could leave a description below, just tell me, what the deck's about, what you're trying to achieve, what's your win condition, what's the the setup like, you know, your general strategy, that'd be great, because it's much easier for me to just pick up that deck, read the description, we go, all right, this is how you play the deck, and I can just dive straight into it. If I see some decks I like, I'll feature them in episodes of Will It Work? So until next time, guys, take care, and I hope you enjoy this balance patch before we have the Fall of Everlife.